They called it the Dreamliner. But in the last 12 years, Boeing's crown jewel has caught fire on the runway, been grounded by regulators, and, on a blistering June afternoon in Ahmedabad, plunged to Earth, taking 241 souls and 19 bystanders with it. Tonight, we connect the dots the press missed, the numbers the quarterly reports buried, and the warning lights that flickered long before India's darkest aviation day. Welcome to another episode of Business Autopsy. Today we will analyze the Dreamliner nightmare. In 2004, Boeing faced a crisis of relevance. Airbus was outselling the 767 and 747. The answer? The 7 times 10 to the power of 7, later christened the 787 Dreamliner, a jet billed as 20% more fuel efficient, built from 50% composite carbon fiber, outfitted with quieter cabins, larger windows, and mood lighting. It was a masterclass in marketing seduction. Before its maiden flight, the Dreamliner recorded a record 677 pre-orders, airlines from Japan to Qatar betting billions on promised savings. But innovation came with risk. Lithium-ion main batteries, never before used as primary aircraft power, new bleedless electrical architecture, and globally outsourced supply chains pushed the program 2 years behind schedule and billions over budget. Boeing's bean counters tightened timelines, and tolerance stacks began to whisper trouble. Suppliers missed targets. Fuselage sections didn't align. But the pressure was relentless. Deliver, launch, impress. And so, deadlines were met. Not by fixing problems, but by pushing them down the runway. The Dreamliner was rolled out in 2007. Logan International Airport, January 7, 2013. Japan Airlines Flight 008 had just emptied its passengers when smoke curled out of its forward electronics bay. Firefighters' pride opened the hatch, finding an overheated 63-pound lithium-ion battery hissing like a kettle. 9 days later, All Nippon Airways Flight 692 declared Mayday. Acrid fumes filled the cockpit. The crew executed an emergency landing. Terrified passengers slid down inflatable chutes onto a provincial runway. For the first time since 1979, the FAA grounded an entire new commercial type. The cause? Thermal runaway. Boeing's battery design lacked cell isolation. The electrolyte could ignite at 150 degrees Celsius. The battery cells were manufactured by GS Yuasa, a Japanese company. But the oversight? All Boeing. They approved a design where one cell's failure could trigger the next, a domino effect of fire. The NTSB revealed that Boeing did not properly test the battery for high-altitude pressure conditions. A failure at 35,000 feet could be fatal. And yet, it passed certification. Engineers raised flags. They were ignored. By the time the FAA acted, 50 aircraft were already flying commercial routes. Boeing's fix, a steel box and better venting, addressed the symptom, not the cause. It was crisis management, not systemic reform. In 2019, John Barnett, a former quality manager at Boeing, went public. His warning? That Boeing's Charleston plant was shipping out Dreamliners with substandard parts, including oxygen systems with a 25% failure rate. He claimed that when he flagged these, managers dismissed the concerns and told him to let it go. In his affidavit, Barnett wrote, "They were more concerned with pushing planes out the door than making sure they were safe." His death in 2024, under mysterious circumstances during a legal deposition, remains a somber footnote. The official report said suicide. Critics, and some journalists, aren't convinced. But he wasn't alone. Multiple anonymous engineers later confirmed gaps in fuselage sections as wide as 0.005 inches, enough to weaken the structural integrity over thousands of pressurization cycles. When Qatar Airways began seeing paint bubbling and composite layers peeling, they grounded their Dreamliners. Boeing denied any systemic issue. Qatar sued. Eventually, other airlines like Etihad and LATAM quietly began inspecting their fleets. Cracks, seal failures, panel corrosion. June 12, 2025. Air India Flight AI-171, a Boeing 787-8, departs Ahmedabad for London. 231 passengers, 10 crew. At 600 feet, both engines throttled down. The fuel cutoff switches, guarded and recessed, were inexplicably flipped. The aircraft stalls and crashes into BJ Medical College. The black box revealed a chilling final exchange. "Why did you cut off?" asked the captain. The co-pilot said, "I didn't." 11 seconds later, impact. 241 on board perish. 19 students die on the ground. Among the victims, a mother on her first flight, a medical researcher heading to a cancer conference, a 12-year-old girl carrying birthday cupcakes. This wasn't pilot error. The pilots were in good health condition, checked before takeoff. They have thousands of hours of flying experience. It is not possible for them to do such mistake. Also, the switches are not normal switches. It cannot be pushed down and turned off easily. But back in 2018, FAA issued a statement to change the fuel switch for precautionary purpose, but the guidance was only advisory. And Air India, like most carriers, skipped it. So there was a chance of this fault, but it was not mandatory. In the end, disaster happened. The tragedy shook India. Prime ministerial condolences. A national day of mourning. Protests by aviation unions. It was the worst aviation disaster on Indian soil in 17 years. And it could have been prevented. The tragedy in India cast a harsh new light on incidents that had previously been dismissed as isolated technical glitches. The pattern of near disasters was suddenly undeniable. Just 1 year earlier, in March 2024, LATAM Airlines Flight 800, a 787 flying from Sydney to Auckland, suddenly nosedived mid-flight. The cabin became a scene of chaos as unrestrained passengers were thrown against the ceiling. 50 people were injured, some seriously. The preliminary cause? Not turbulence, but a cockpit seat malfunction that pushed the pilot into the controls. A freak accident, or another symptom of a flawed system. The engine issues also never truly went away. The engine plague caused by premature blade cracking in the Rolls-Royce Trent 1000s continued to ground aircraft globally. But new problems emerged in the alternative General Electric engines as well, with icing issues causing them to shut down at high altitudes. Airlines were caught in an impossible situation, flying a plane whose two different engine options had both shown critical flaws. Then came the smaller, insidious warnings. A KLM 787 suffering cabin depressurization over Canada. An American Airlines flight where cockpit displays temporarily went black during turbulence. The reports kept coming, a drumbeat of malfunctions. Each time, Boeing would issue a service bulletin, a software patch, a PR statement. Each problem was treated in isolation, a branch trimmed from a tree whose roots were slowly rotting away. So why did this keep happening? To find the answer, our autopsy must go deeper than a single plane. We must dissect the company that built it. The story of Boeing's modern crisis begins in 1997, with its merger with rival McDonnell Douglas. It was a corporate takeover that insiders say fundamentally changed Boeing's soul. The engineers-first culture that had defined Boeing for decades was systematically replaced by a finance-first culture from McDonnell Douglas. Shareholder value, cost-cutting, and production speed became the new religion. This philosophy cascaded down to the factory floor, creating what the NTSB would later call a culture of concealment. This new culture needed a partner, a weakened regulator. The FAA, underfunded and understaffed, increasingly outsourced its oversight duties back to the company it was supposed to be policing. Through a program called Organization Designation Authorization, or ODA, Boeing was effectively allowed to self-certify its own aircraft, including key safety systems on both the 737 MAX and the 787. It was the fox not only guarding the henhouse but designing it, building it, and signing its own safety certificate. This is the system that ignored engineers who flagged the 787's battery risks. This is the system that dismissed the warnings of quality manager John Barnett, who claimed that up to 25% of the oxygen systems on the Dreamliner could be faulty. And it's a system that, for years, allowed the Dreamliner to escape the intense scrutiny applied to the 737 MAX, simply because its trail of failures had not yet led to a mass fatality event on Western soil. Until Ahmedabad. Could the Ahmedabad tragedy have been prevented? The answer is an unequivocal yes. It could have been prevented when engineers first raised flags about the batteries. It could have been prevented when John Barnett pleaded with managers to address the oxygen systems. It could have been prevented when the FAA received reports of worn wiring in the cockpit. But prevention requires a culture that prioritizes safety over stock price. A culture that protects and elevates whistleblowers instead of silencing them. Today, over 1,000 Dreamliners are in service. Millions of people board them every year, trusting the carbon fiber wings, the advanced software, and the two powerful engines to carry them safely across the globe. They are, by the numbers, incredibly safe. But what is safety? Is it a statistic? Or is it a promise? The autopsy of the Dreamliner shows that even the most brilliant designs are vulnerable to the quiet decay of corporate culture. It leaves us with an unsettling question. When we step onto a modern marvel, are we trusting the machine, or are we trusting the system that built it? Because behind every outcome lies a blueprint, and some blueprints are drawn in ink, while others are written in blood. Subscribe to Business Autopsy and enable notifications so you don't miss the next case file.